Hello, good evening. As Syria attempts to navigate a complex path towards recovery, its internal stability plays a pivotal role in shaping its international relations. With recent visits from high-level European delegations and growing calls for easing sanctions, the international community watches closely. Syria's upcoming national dialogue, alongside shifting alliances in the Middle East, signals a potential re-engagement with the global stage. How will these efforts influence Syria's relationships with the outside world? Welcome to Think Tank. The National has reported that Italy will host a pivotal meeting of Western foreign ministers to discuss Syria's transition, focusing on drafting a new constitution, plans for economic recovery, and the formation of transitional government. The agenda emphasizes creating a political framework that ensures inclusivity, minority rights, and long-term stability following the fall of the Assad regime. The meeting will also address Syria's delayed National Dialogue Conference and ongoing EU deliberations on lifting sanctions. European officials stress the importance of genuine reforms, particularly in human rights and minority representation, as prerequisites for further engagement. This transition represents a significant shift in Syria's political landscape, challenging the influence of previous regime allies. Western leaders aim to leverage this moment to stabilize Syria while shaping its future international relations. The Guardian has reported that Western powers are conditioning the lifting of sanctions on Syria with demands for a pluralistic, democratic government, emphasizing inclusivity, particularly women's rights. Ahmed al-Shara, the chief of military operations, argues that delaying elections is necessary to establish proper infrastructure, but critics fear this could be a strategy to consolidate his power. His stance is further strengthened by widespread Syrian distrust towards the UN, which many believe has failed to deliver justice during this prolonged conflict. As the West urges Syria's new leaders to enact an inclusive transition, the challenge lies in whether Damascus can address these conditions without jeopardizing national cohesion or prolonging instability. Now, to discuss these matters, we are joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohamed Osman, an international relations expert, and also Abdulrahman Raboua, who is a political analyst. Thank you very much for joining me here on the program. We'll start with you, Dr. Osman. How do you assess the recent visits by these European delegations to Damascus? What does that mean for Syria's re-engagement with the West?
Thank you, Mark, for having me. Of course, the EU is keen on reestablishing relations with Syria after the fall of President Bashar al-Assad. Basically, most of the EU countries in Syria have been in a state of open enmity since the civil war in Syria has started. Syria has always been a core ally of Russia, countries like Russia and Iran. However, the European countries right now are keen on re-establishing strategic relations with Syria for a variety of incentives, including economic incentives, geopolitical incentives, and security concerns as well. However, this enthusiasm varies from one country to the other. Some countries are preoccupied with the security concern. Some are preoccupied with the human rights concerns. Some are much more focused on gaining leverage in the geopolitical competition in the region with Iran, of course, as part of an alliance with the United States and Israel, and of course, in the geopolitical competition or conflict with Russia as well. However, go ahead.
I'll bring Mr. Rabua in now. So given Syria's upcoming national dialogue as well, do you think that this could pave the way for a broader international acceptance of Syria?
Thanks for having me. Naturally, this conference expected to be held in March or April, that would gather all the Syrian and great opportunities for a dialogue and get familiar with the fatal issues. And it's important for the Syrian to dialogue, and now it is a great opportunity for the Syrian to sit together and to discuss their future and stability issues. For the international community is monitoring this movement, and I think there are great intentions for having a secure and stable Syria, and to rebuild as well as to witness the return of the refugees. So, and I think there is a great opportunity to coordinate this dialogue and to convince the international community that Syria is taking the right path in reaching peace and stability.
Thank you very much. Bringing you back in, Dr. Osman. Germany reportedly calling for the easing of sanctions against Syria. How important is the role of the European Union when it comes to Syria's recovery?
Of course, Germany has reportedly called for or urged the European Union to ease sanctions on Syria after Annalena Baerbock, the Europe's Minister of Foreign Affairs, visited Damascus along with Foreign Minister Barrot of France, and apparently the meeting was constructive. And Germany seems to have received certain guarantees from the transitional government of Syria that are more conducive to EU interests. So that might explain why Germany might be willing to push for the easing or the lessening of sanctions on Syria, especially that Germany is, as we all know, the economic and political powerhouse of the European Union. However, of course, this will not happen overnight. I think the Europeans are keen on seeing more results and more active steps taken on the ground before they proceed with any easing of sanctions, especially with the procession of the political transition. Ahmad al-Shar'a has committed, the new de facto leader of Syria, has committed to an inclusive democratic transition. This is what he claims. However, he says that elections will not be held for 4 years, and that a constitution will take 3 years to be drafted. And he said that they will hold the national dialogue without even establishing a certain premise in which the dialogue will transpire, and it does not even specify or indicate who will be the participants in the national dialogue. So I think it remains to be seen whether the political transition will actually be inclusive and democratic. And not exclusionary in any sense. If this is the case, maybe then it will encourage the European Union to take a more proactive stance on Syria. However, this is not the only factor. The other factor is the eradication of Russian influence inside Syria. That's a precondition that the Europeans have clearly placed, and the Americans as well, on the Syrians, and as well the question of the Kurds. France is committed to the Kurds and the SDF. It seems that Ahmad al-Shar'a and his government are heading towards open conflict, potential open conflict with the SDF with Turkish support. If this happens, it will definitely jeopardize the relations between certain European powers like France and the new Syrian government.
And Mr. Rabua, Dr. Osman there says it won't happen overnight. How much political progress needs to be made in Syria before the country will be internationally reintegrated?
Syria has priorities in this term of stability and security and confronting terrorism, and to revive the infrastructure and the provision of the basic services for the citizen, which is a principal demand in this term, and to pave the way for a dialogue democratic, and we are before a caretaker government to provide discipline and security, as well as elevating or eradicating the foreigners from Syria, and then focusing the establishment of the national establishment based in justice, as well as drafting a new constitution that should be based in citizenship and not the nationalism or sectarism. We are before a new phase that should denounce all the previous resolutions that have been issued based in religion and sectarism. Syrians are hopeful for equality before the law, and they have a great opportunities for work and children responsibility, particularly women and youth. And the marginalized groups, such as the Syrian majority that were receiving all oppression practices and were deprived from the human rights, and now they are free and having a new opportunities to rebuild Syria for the Syrians to be equal before the law and children the same burden and responsibility, and equally to have the same rights. The current government announced that are capable to do this, and of course would require time to drafting and establishing constitution and transitional term with the support and the assistance from the Brazilian Arab world. Syrians are fully confident with the Arab and do not trust Turkey or any dedications coming from the West, and rejecting all the Russian, Iranian and Israeli intervention in the Syrian matters, and they pursue to get away all these types of intervention and rebuild their country in a way that to participate all in work, and the current or the upcoming administration should be up to the responsibility, otherwise will be deprived from the landscape as the previous regime.
And we touched on European nations, but what about the big one? How likely is it that the United States will ever fully normalize relations with Syria?
The big one indeed. I think the United States has much less harsher conditions or much less stiffer conditions than the Europeans in order to normalize and establish relations with the new government in Syria. Let's not forget that this entire change of government inside Syria was supported wholeheartedly by the United States. This is not something that anyone can deny. And the United States is invested in driving the current model of governance in Syria into success, especially with the future, with the upcoming Trump administration in the very near future. In about 12 days, we will have a new U.S. administration. And it seems that the Trump administration, from what we hear from President Trump, President-elect Trump, is that he is very disinterested in Syrian affairs. He does not believe that the United States should be invested in dictating any of the internal proceedings of Syrian politics, it seems. And it seems that he is very willing to let Turkey play an expanded role in Syrian affairs, and the Americans are very willing, the Trump administration, of course, to delegate many of its concerns and responsibilities. And the question of the Kurds are a core ally of the Americans. The Americans have helped the SDF armed factions in arming them to fight ISIS and to combat all forms of extremist terrorism, especially in eastern and northeastern Syria. Now, there's a question, will the United States abandon the SDF because of Trump actually done that? He contemplated doing that in his previous administration and was prevented by his advisors from doing so. However, now the situation is different. Bashar al-Assad is not there anymore. The Russians are not there anymore, or are not an active force or an effective force inside Syria, and the Iranians are not there anymore. So it seems that if Turkey is willing to secure American interests from the expense of the Kurds, I think this is a bargain that Trump might elect to take. And of course, this will place the fate of the SDF in peril. However, of course, this is all pure speculation. Donald Trump is a very unpredictable president, and maybe the United States will wholeheartedly surprise us and enact a completely different policy on Syria, opposite to the signs and indicators we see at the moment.
Yes, it's been said many times, the one consistent thing about Donald Trump is his inconsistency and his ability to surprise. We'll have to see what happens over the coming weeks and months. Stay with me, gentlemen. We're going to come back and continue our conversation shortly. But first, let's watch a report on Syria's evolving diplomatic outreach as global powers cautiously assess its path to recovery.
Syria's position on the international stage has dramatically evolved from being a pariah state to unengaged in diplomatic measures. Recently, high-level European delegations, including those from Germany, visited Damascus, signaling tentative re-engagement. However, Syria's internal situation remains pivotal in shaping its relations with the outside world. The government's commitment to a historic national dialogue conference is an attempt to consolidate control, address the grievances of various societal factions, and build a vision for Syria's future. Syrian Foreign Minister Asad al-Shibani emphasized this inclusive dialogue as crucial for ensuring long-term national unity. However, Syria's internal recovery is heavily affected by its fractured society, dealing with regional, sectarian, and economic challenges. The European Union's stance, particularly Germany's call for easing sanctions, further underscores the shifting dynamics in Syria's international relations. The EU acknowledges that sanctions have not effectively pushed for regime change, but instead have worsened conditions for ordinary Syrians. However, Europe remains cautious, indicating that any significant policy change will hinge in meaningful internal reforms, especially in governance and human rights. Meanwhile, the United States policy under President Trump, although speculative, will likely be influenced by Syria's internal trajectory. Failure to address Syria's political and humanitarian challenges could prevent its full reintegration into the global community. Syria's relations with the outside world hinges not only on the diplomatic gestures of other nations, but on the substantial reforms and internal stability it achieves. Without genuine internal progress, Syria's return to the global community will remain tentative, marked by cautious engagement rather than full reintegration.
And we're still here with Dr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations expert, and of course Abdurrahman Raboua, who is a political analyst. Thanks for staying with me, gentlemen. Coming to you, Mr. Raboua, considering Syria's efforts for a national dialogue, first of all, what do they hope to achieve, do you think, with this national dialogue? And how might the international community respond to that?
Syrians are very much dependent on the national dialogue as a real opportunity that is available for the Syrian for the last 50 to 60 years to determine their fate by themselves without any foreign dedication or interventions, and they hope that the national dialogue should be the main platform for drafting the future in Syria and put the pillars in building and reconstructing the state and its institutions and resume the international and regional relations to the right path and return its vitality in establishing security and stability in the region and to be in a main in confronting systematic crime and terrorism as well as drug gangs, and in the meantime to establish the justice and democratic institution to constitute a free and a transparent elections, and the international community surely will monitor that. The Syrians will do this job not to please somebody else, but for themselves, to fulfill their basic needs, from reconstructing the state, reshaping the communities and society to be a civil state established based on democratic principles and building a peaceful community that enjoy peace and security, and also to confront terrorism, extremism ideologies and organizations that belong to the political religion or inconsistent ideologies with the new era, and defeat the radical ideology to be replaced by a state of citizenship that includes everyone. And I think that be established within 1 year or 2 years, and the international community will be happy then. And for the Syrians, upon that, will gain the respect they deserve, as well as support and assistance, as we all know that the whole state is demolished, that in dire need for reconstruction, and as well as the Syrian institutions, in order for Syria to stand again, not to rely on and for the international and regional community to assist Syria by
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Rawat. I just want to bring Dr. Osman in, and we're running out of time. Given the fact that Russia and Syria, of course, were very close in the Assad regime, given the fact that Russia is playing home to Assad and his family right now, and given the fact that there's reports that the EU are putting pressure on Damascus to end Russian military presence in Syria, what is the future of Syrian-Russian relations?
The new administration of Syria is in a dilemma at the moment. On the one hand, they are keen on preserving some sort of relationship with Russia in order not to buy Russian enmity, especially that they believe that Russia could still influence some way or the other how the situation transpires inside Syria, especially with its connection with former regime elements. They will not just fade. Assad had a multitude of supporters inside Syria, and it would be wrong to ignore this fact. So I think this is something that they are trying to maintain, a very delicate balance, trying to speak with the Russians and negotiate a deal where they can keep their bases potentially. However, on the other hand, the European Union clearly placed the removal of Russian military bases inside Syria as one of the preconditions to the lifting of sanctions. And I think if it comes to picking a side or choosing whether they will choose relations, deepening relations and sanction relief from the West, or maintaining a relationship with Russia, I think they will choose to maintain a relationship with the West. And they actually expel the Russian bases from Syria. And I think the Russians are ready to leave and evacuate Syria if necessary, because they know that they lost war, and that they might leave at any moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Mohammed Osman. Thank you for your insights, and also Mr. Abdulrahman Raboua. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining me here on this program. And thank you very much for watching. That brings us to the end of this edition of Think Tank. Stay watching for more updates right here on Q News. Good night.